Just want to thank everyone for joining this webinar on the situation of Ahmed Mansoor. He was, as we know, detained in 2017 by UAE officials. The 51-year-old is an engineer and the father of four. He was detained by the authorities and convicted for publishing what they said was false information, rumors, and lies about the United Arab Emirates. For this, Emirati court sentenced him to 10 years in prison. While incarcerated, Mansoor has faced inhumane treatment, extremely poor conditions, including being held in solitary confinement and in a really cold cell. Last year, Human Rights Watch warned of the grave risk facing the health of Mansoor. The rights group said that in 2009, Mansoor had embarked on 2 hunger strikes to demand basic prisoners' rights, including an end to solitary confinement and access to all basic necessities. In his second hunger strike, which lasted 45 days, he lost 11 kilograms in weight. The rights group also called on the authorities in the UAE and the international community for his immediate release. So this webinar really has been organized to highlight his situation and also the wider repression of human rights abuse in the UAE. And first to speak on the issue is Bruce Fain. Bruce is an American lawyer specializing in constitutional and international law. His topic will be the definition of hate speech in law and its relation to the accusations of Ahmed Mansoor. So Bruce, is over to you.
Yes. It's clear under a universal understanding of freedom of speech that there can be no such thing as criminalizing speech that criticizes government. Indeed, a government in free speech doctrine cannot even sue for defamation if the speech is false. So the detention and the accusation and the conviction clearly flouts the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it flouts the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. This is not unusual in UAE. It has no independent judiciary. It is a lawless country. It has committed human rights crimes in the war against Yemen. And its attitude towards free speech is that those who dissent become criminalized rather than participants in a democratic discourse. There really is perhaps a possible appeal here to the working group on arbitrary detention. It's 5 members that sit at The Hague. It's an arm of the Human Rights Council. And this clearly is a case of arbitrary detention based upon freedom of speech exercised by an UAE citizen who's using free speech to try to upgrade the level of democracy and freedom rather than to destroy the government. Now, I don't know whether anyone has yet taken the case to the working group, but it has a long roster of persons illegally detained. And I think that perhaps could be the next step here. I do not think, given the compromised nature of the UAE judiciary, that appeals there are going to amount to anything. And unfortunately, UAE has enough oil revenue that it's difficult to apply economic sanctions that would result in any kind of changed behavior. Anyway, those are my general observations. It's a blatant case of violating international legal protection of freedom of speech. It would be possible, because of the magnitude of the violation, that the United States, under the Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act, could impose asset freezes and visa prohibitions upon the UAE officials responsible for his detention and torture, so that they could have no further dealings with the United States. But that's up to the Biden administration under the act to determine whether to list. Now, we still have relations with the UAE regarding weapon sales, but it's possible that human rights groups could put enough pressure to at least ban these officials complicit in the free speech violations from visiting or doing business in the United States.
Thanks for that, Bruce. I think it was very short, succinct, and I think we've got the gist of your presentation, even though you cut off for a few seconds there. There's a number of questions that we can raise regarding this, but I think we'll hold on to that and move on to David. David Hay, he is a British human rights lawyer and international crisis and media manager. David will speak on how the international community can make changes in Ahmed Mansoor's case. So David, it's over to you.
Thank you, Nassim. Mansoor's convictions and sentence, as well as his dehumanizing detention conditions, represent acts of brutal state repression and grave human rights abuses. UN rights experts, the European Parliament, US Congress members, Nobel Prize winners, well-known authors, prominent intellectuals, and international political figures have all condemned the imprisonment and treatment of Ahmed Mansoor by the UAE, as have the likes of Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, who continue to advocate and fight on Ahmed's behalf. Despite all of this, though, the UAE has largely remained insulated from meaningful criticism and action by its closest allies in relation to its treatment of Ahmed Mansoor. Over the past few years, UAE rulers have invested considerably in promoting the UAE as an open, tolerant, and rights-respecting country, a strategy that has helped undermine efforts to hold the government accountable for its grave human rights abuses, not just in related to Ahmed Mansoor, but also in Yemen, for example. Instead, the UAE's key allies in relations with countries like the US, the UK, the EU, have grown deeper and more extensive. As many of you know, I founded the Free Latifa campaign in 2018. Our campaign was to secure the release of Princess Latifa of Dubai, the daughter of the ruler. Latifa was illegally captured in 2018 after her attempts to flee Dubai failed. She and several other international citizens were kidnapped at gunpoint by the UAE, taken to Dubai, and in the case of Latifa, held hostage ever since, until a few months ago. In 2018, few would listen to our campaign or our calls of the grave abuses of human rights by the UAE on Latifa and the others captured. We filed complaints of such abuses to Latifa with law enforcement bodies, international courts, the UN, and with politicians. Few were interested at that time. It was not until we commenced an international and hopefully successful media campaign to press those commercial interests, to put pressure on the law enforcement bodies, politicians, and the UN to take action that we saw change. Earlier this year, following our release of videos recorded by Latifa from her jail villa as a hostage about her fears for her life and the conditions she was held in, finally the world and international leaders started to take note, and we saw change. This experience has led me to believe that it is only when we raise Ahmed's plight and the daily horrors he faces in the UAE jails to as many people as possible and as many media as possible around the world as we did in the case of Latifa, that we will see the appropriate pressure that will force the international community to act and to do more than they are currently doing. It should no longer be acceptable for the likes of former British Prime Minister Theresa May to attend a women's rights conference at the Dubai World Tolerance Summit, whilst Ahmed or any other person is suffering grave human rights abuses in the UAE. To conclude, I would call on the governments of the United States, Britain, France, and other EU countries to publicly and privately call on the UAE authorities to immediately and unconditionally release Ahmed Mansoor and anyone else in the UAE detained for exercising their basic right of freedom of speech. I would call on those same governments to contest the UAE's attempts and highlight the hypocrisy when they try to whitewash their human rights abuses by presenting themselves as a tolerant, progressive, and rights-respecting country, of which they are not. Thank you very much.
For that encouraging and positive presentation. I wasn't aware that you were involved in Latifa's case, but that's been an amazing success. And I think, as you said, if we can replicate something like that for the likes of Mansoor and others, that would be amazing. And maybe we can discuss how that could be done with media agencies and human rights groups as well to highlight the case of Mansoor as you did with Latifa. I want to move swiftly on with a presentation by Kaleo Castro. Sorry if I've mispronounced your name. Kaleo Castro is right. a former detainee in the UAE and a witness of Ahmed Mansour's situation. So Kaleo, I'll hand over to you, and yes, the microphone is yours.
Can you everybody hear me? Everybody can hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Listen, I was incarcerated in Al Sadr jail for 6 months, more or less, and I was with Ahmed Mansoor. I could witness, I could see everything that this guy was going through, right? The first thing I realized that this old man, because I didn't realize he was only 51 years old, because his condition, his health condition is someone that is around 65, 70 years old. It's like my mother. Everything that I could see, and we got close to each other because the facility, they had to go to some works just before summer. So they put us one beside the other because he's not allowed to have anyone around him, because he's not allowed to have news from outside. He's not allowed to read. I was smuggling, and I'm not ashamed of that. I was smuggling him books because he said, listen, I need to get out of my head because I'm dying here. So with help of other jailers, because some jailers, they like him very much. Some jailers, they know he's not guilty for anything. But the thing is, I've been in Dubai jail just for some small things that someone is smuggling drugs in my house. And I've been jailed for that. And I've seen all types of prisoners there. Rapists, killers, people that stole money from the government. But the only one that I saw is sleeping on the floor without a blanket and cold water was Ahmed Mansoor. And this is the reason that I said, listen, I need to do something because it's not human what this guy is going through. So along the 6 months, he told all history that happened to him, all right? Since the moment of his arrest, everything he's done. He said, the only thing I want is that my country will be a better country. Sometimes the officers come to talk to him, the manager of the jail. Every time the manager of the jail comes to talk to him, all the other officers stay outside. There's no shouting inside the cell because they talk to each other in a nice tone of voice. However, when this manager is not there and the officers go to talk to him, let's say Captain Diab, for example, he's one of the guys that is really shouting to him and is really rude. And he said, I remember once Mansoor told me, they are scared that when I go out, I will try to have any political position. And I don't want. I just want my country to be a better country with the human rights. This guy, the Ahmed Mansoor, he said, listen, my glasses, my reading glasses are there for 5 months. I can't read. I need to read with a book close to my eye. The books that I was smuggling into his cell for him to have something to read because he's not allowed to have any news from outside. He was allowed to have 5 books. The books are still on the drawer of the officers. They are not allowed, he's not allowed to have these books. Every time he goes for the phone calls, he comes back very upset because he's allowed to have 5 minutes with his mother and 5 minutes with his family, wife and kids. It's not possible to talk 5 minutes with his 4 children and wife. And he comes back upset because they cut the communication every 3.5 minutes. For the sunbath, they need to remove everybody from outside to allow Ahmed Mansoor to go for 1 hour and 20 minutes. But this 1 hour and 20 minutes in the paper, he stays for 20 minutes, he needs to come back. His health condition, I saw. Mansoor, what's your problem? Oh, now I'm having a blood pressure problem. Now I'm having cholesterol problem. Even though I try to go outside and make some exercise, they don't allow me to stay 1 hour and 20. The only way that I have to walk is inside my cell. And this poor man, he wakes up in the morning, he starts praying at 5 o'clock in the morning, and he finishes prayer at 8 o'clock in the evening, and he goes to bed. I'm really grateful for this man, because even though I knew I was going out, I was coming back home very soon, I thought about taking my life. I did. Because the only thing we can take from a human being, the most important thing we can take out from a human being is the freedom. And this guy, one day he wakes up in the morning, he said, listen, Cassio, today it's 3.5 years that I'm here. I said, how can you do that? He said, I don't know until when I will. Because my health, I feel that my health is going on. It's going away. I feel that I'm not the same man that I came in. And they don't want me to go out. He said, listen, today anybody's allowed to come inside the jail. I'm going with Bruce said, and with David said as well. He said, the last time human rights went inside the jail, they changed the catering. Ahmed Mansoor said, I don't know what I'm having, a nice food, I'm having a nice catering. And then someone from the human rights years ago, they went inside the jail and they found out that he was very well treated. As soon as they left, it came back the poor food. All right? He is not allowed to talk to anyone. Thanks God, the pandemic came. Of course, you know what I mean? That all the officers, they left the jail. And then the small officers, the jailers, they allowed me to stay close to him for the 6 months. They allowed me to go inside the buildings, that I could find out and I could write down names that Africans, most of them are Africans, they are inside the jail, even though they were declared innocent by the judge. I have names, I have prison numbers. I have, for example, just one case. This gentleman, this boy, I say it's a boy because he's way younger than me. He stayed 5 years in jail until be declared innocent. And then they sent him to Nigeria. It's absurd. This is very, very absurd. For example, here, Obina, this is Obina, arrested 6 December 2016. He was declared not guilty in 3rd September 2020. 5 years in jail without a judgment and declare not guilty. How can they do that? So Thomas Ronald from Cameroon, arrested on 3rd of July 2019. He was declared innocent on 17th of March 2020. And when I left Abu Dhabi, this guy was still in jail. He was still in jail. Well, I had some benefits because of my nationality and because of the pandemic, because the officers were not inside the jail. So I could go up and down and I could take names and I could take histories. And it's just, we need to do something. It's not human what UAE do to prisoners and foreigners. I was in Dubai, HIV prisoners. If they are Emiratis, they have their treatment every single day, 1 pill. 1 capsule. If they are Nigerian, if they are Brazilians, they get their treatment, 3 capsules for the old treatment, and it does not come every day. Hepatitis C, if you are Emirati, you get your treatment. If you are foreigner, there's a Uzbekistani guy over there, he's dying. So that's everything that I have to say. We need to release this guy. We need to release the prisoners over there because it's torture. The president of France, Macron, he said, the crown prince of Abu Dhabi is torturing prisoners in Yemen. but he's doing it also in his own country. And of course, sanctions, we can also, they have oil. They have oil. They buy aircraft in the United States, they buy aircraft in Europe. Who is going to fight against these people? They do what they want. And I tell you the rumors, I tell here, I never mentioned to any TV. They take a Bengali Indian prisoner, they sentence for 20 years. They say this guy is sick at some point. They take a kidney of this guy for a transplant for an Arab citizen. And they release this guy after 2 years, 2 months, 6 months. Listen, you got the pardon, you can go home. Listen, this is a rumor. I didn't witness this, but it's a very strong rumor that happens inside the jail. I wrote a book about every history of HIV prisoners over there, of everyone who was declared innocent, and they are still in jail. What can we do? Thank you very much, Khalil Castro. Thank you very much.
Khalil. Thank you, Khalil, for that really powerful and emotional speech, covering the appalling situation really Mansoor is in, and also generally the situation of prisoners in UAE. I think you have a lot to say about your account, what you've experienced there, and I wish more and more human rights groups would get in touch with you to really find out what's happening within those prisons, and also maybe officials in various countries in the US, Washington and London here as well, because our governments trade with the UAE, and if those allegations are, as you say, especially the organ transplant thing, if that is, as you say, there needs to be at least some kind of investigation. So I applaud you for being quite honest and frank about your experience there. I want to move on to now our next speaker, who is Ahmed Al-Shaiba Al-Nuaimi. He is the president of the International Institute for Studies and Development. Ahmed, he will speak about the UAE reputation regarding human rights application. Ahmed, over to you.
Hi, everyone. It's actually hard to talk after what I heard about my friend Ahmed Mansoor from Mr. Calio Castro. And this is the first time actually to heard about something that I haven't heard about many things. And how he explained the situation of Ahmed actually touched my heart. And it's very hard to imagine, even that we know how is the present in our country, in the United Arab Emirates, and how our activists face problems every day, and how even their family. Today, if I want to talk about Ahmed, it is very hard to explain or to say something. It's in his level, because Ahmed is, I can say, the human rights icon in the United Arab Emirates, who sacrificed a lot. And his dream was to see his country, our country, better for the human rights, for the freedom of the people. He was calling for freedom, and he raised his voice even in the war situation that we had in the United Arab Emirates. When the violence started in 2012, Ahmed did not stop. He actually raised his voice while it was very dangerous. Even his friends did the same, but Ahmed faced a lot of problems. And Ahmed, I can say, he's the story of Ahmed is a story of a human, of a very honest person for his country, for his people, who tried to reach better level for his country, for his people, for his family, for the future of his children. And today we see his children actually lose him and do not see him and cannot reach him and cannot have the right of his fatherhood. In the same time that we see the people who commit violence, they are free and they can do whatever they want to do in the United Arab Emirates. I'm sorry actually to hear that and to say that about my country. I love my country, and we shared the same mission, me and Ahmed and the other people who are in jail now. What happened to Ahmed? It's actually the story of the human rights in the United Arab Emirates, the violence against all the people who call for freedom. And that started from, I can say from 2011, when the United Arab Emirates government scared from the Arab Spring, and they want to stop any call for freedom. At that time, there was a petition. It was signed by the people like Ahmed Mansoor, the activist people and the academic people, and they signed this petition. It was peaceful call for freedom, but unfortunately, the government did not take it peacefully. The country who said that it's beside the human rights and defends human rights. No, it's actually, it wasn't like that. And we can say that Ahmed did not, it's not the first time to face the jail and to face human rights violence. It was, he was one of the first people who faced that in 2011. And after they actually give him a sentence of 3 years, they give him a pardon from the president. Then they arrested him in 2018 because they thought that they will stop him from the first prison and first torture that he faced. But Ahmed is a brave person who continue call for freedom and call for the human right of the people even in the jail. It was dangerous. It was dangerous, but Ahmed was calling for freedom from inside the United Arab Emirates. He's a hero. He was a hero who called for that. I can say that Ahmed, he is not the one only who faced this problem. We have more than 100 human rights activists jailed, and they face the same problem. One of them is my brother, actually, Khalid Asheba and Nuaimi, and they face a lot of problems in the jail. They are actually isolated from the outside. They can't even reach their family. Sometimes they stay for 6 or 7 months or 1 year. One of them actually spent 2 years without having even call from his family or can call his family. We can imagine how they suffer every day, and their family suffer every day. Their actually situation is getting worse and worse. One of them is Muhammad Abdul Razak al-Siddiq, if you remember, Ala al-Siddiq, who was died in UK a few months ago. Ala was a human rights activist, and her father was jailed because of the petition that he signed, and his citizenship was withdrawn as well. Muhammad Abdul Razak, for 2 years, he could not reach his family. He could not call his family as well. And when they went to him, they just went to him to tell him that your daughter has passed away. This was his situation. So you can imagine what is the problem. No one can talk. No one can even tweet about their idea if it's not the same side with the government. No one can tell their opinion in the United Arab Emirates, unfortunately. The message of Ahmed Mansoor and the mission that he had is to see his country better and to see the human right in better situation in our country. And we have the same message. And this message will be continued. And if Ahmed could not reach it, and if we cannot reach it today, our children will reach it. I want to say for Ahmed's wife and Ahmed's children, we are sorry. We are trying to bring Ahmed to be with you, but we couldn't because of that government, because of the violence of the government. We will try and we will not stop. Thank you actually for inviting us for this event and to raise Ahmed's issue for the people and for the world. And we will work hard together to take Ahmed and his friends from the jail. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Ahmed. No, thank you for your commitment and your dedication to the situation in the human rights issue in UAE, and also your commitment and dedication to Ahmed Mansoor and your amazing speech on how people who are struggling for human rights are facing threat to their security and life in the UAE. And I think you should be applauded for what you're doing. And maybe we can come back to you and others regarding the situation regarding Abdul Razak, for example, and others who are also in a similar kind of predicament as Ahmed Mansoor. But before I do that, before I bring in some of the other speakers, some of the other guests to speak, I wanted to kind of tie in everything and maybe we can have a conversation. As you know, I mean, Ahmed Mansoor's plight and situation really exists within a wider authoritarian structure within the Middle East. Over recent decades, there has been a question mark over the robustness of authoritarianism in the Middle East. When will their shelf life end? Can these regimes like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, can they survive within a context where, people are calling and demanding democracy, and where democracy and human rights is seen as a normative way of running a country? So Arab authoritarianism has shown, however, to be really flexible, really resilient, more enduring than ever before. And the UAE, from what we can see, is really an example of this, I would say, an amazing success of how authoritarianism has become the model and the template for governing countries in the region. The small Gulf state is no longer content to just survive and thrive as an economic hub, as we've seen with Dubai and other countries, but it's really gone out there to reshape the region in an effort to what I could say, describe as trying to make the world safe for autocracy. We've all heard about the phrase making the world safe for democracy, but I think what the UAE is really engaged in, especially since the Arab Spring, is making the region and the world safe for authoritarianism and autocracy. And Ahmed Mansoor's case really exists within the backdrop of this shift and mindset within the UAE. As we saw with the popular uprising, in 2011, a number of regimes fell. Like countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia felt the most at unease at the tidal wave of protesters within the region. So they devised, I would say, a template with which to contain this form of popular uprising. And this template basically has a political dimension, a military dimension, and a religious dimension. And on the political front, we have seen how the UAE has funded counter-revolution in Egypt, and of course now in Tunisia as well, undermining pro-democratic forces. It launched a blockade of Qatar on a political level. And of course, its normalized relationship within Israel, I would say, as part of a wider framework in advancing its political ideals and also securing autocracy within the regime, within the region. And lately, of course, we've seen the NSO scandal of phone hacking, which the UAE has appeared prominently throughout. Then, of course, there's the military arena, where the UAE has taken military action in Yemen, in places like, of course, in Libya, and parts of the Horn of Africa. And on a religious front, this is the other dimension I would say the UAE has used to advance and secure its authoritarianism, is that it has enlisted the support of prominent scholars to shape the narrative over governance, and to argue the case that a quietist political approach is really the normative Islamic position when it comes to regime change and politics and governance. So they set up the Forum for Promoting Peace in Muslim Societies, which is really not what it claims to be. So some of the arguments pushed forward is the idea that, you know, people should defer justice, defer ideas of human rights, defer these concepts for the sake of peace. Such call for peace, above all else, you know, it relegates justice, relegates human rights to the background, and the only thing that we should be striving for is stability. So this is presented with an Islamic narrative, an Islamic framework. So over the years, as we've seen in the last decade, the UAE has advanced the cause of authoritarianism, has secured authoritarianism by these three means. And I think, if anything, signs are that in all those fronts, the political, the military, and the economic fronts, UAE will become even more emboldened, especially with the announcement that, you know, not the announcement, but the ongoing withdrawal of US forces in the region, and US interests shifting to other parts of the world. So I think I just wanted to, you know, present the wider geopolitical context within which the case of Ahmed Mansoor's plight exists, and the wider repression which the UAE has embarked upon, and the means by which it's doing that. With that said, I want to bring in other speakers if they wanted to contribute, add more. If our guests also wanted to say anything more to what would have been touched upon, feel free to do so. But I want to begin by asking if Stephen, you were here from the beginning. I was wondering if you wanted to say something about what's been said so far, and say a few words.
Sure, just a couple of observations that. I recall when I was in United Arab Emirates some years ago, it was part of a tour of US academics. And it was very clear that we could only do interviews and only talk to people that were approved by the government. And I remember as we were all being put up in the Abu Dhabi Hilton, and I was with some colleagues, and they were putting the caviar in their, you know, part of their big buffet plate. And I point out the sense that we might, there may be an attempt to sort of buy us off, if you will. And the colleague who was from Southwest Louisiana State said, "I learned long ago that every man has a price, and mine's not very high," as he put on more caviar. And I mean, and it's sort of an illustration of the fact that the regime has gone to some, you know, great lengths to try to impact public opinion, you know, by these junkets for journalists, for academics, for others, and that they have been largely successful in many respects by not making the support by the United States and Britain, you know, the two biggest backers of the UAE regime, what isn't a bigger issue. I recall during that same trip going to speaking to the ambassador at the U.S. Embassy in Abu Dhabi, and we were in the little conference room where the ambassador meets with small groups. And I've been, you know, at least a dozen U.S. embassies overseas at one point or another. I've had similar conversations with various ambassadors and their deputies in similar seminar rooms, and normally you have, when you have in such a context, you have photos usually of some, you know, places of historic or scenic significance in the United States, or other more general photos. In this room, every single photograph was of a US weapon system, a missile, jet fighter, you know, other sophisticated military equipment that the United States was providing the UAE. And I thought that was so emblematic of the US relationship. And, you know, the fact is that, you know, governments, you know, like UAE would not be able to get away with the kind of persecution of Ahmed Mansoor unless they knew they had the backing of of these Western democracies. You know, Biden, you know, when Trump was president, you know, he made no pretense of supporting human rights. He made no pretense of supporting democratic change. It was all transactional to him, all, you know, power politics, and Biden promised to change that. He promised to have a more rules-based international order when he came to office. However, within a couple months, he effectively upheld the massive new arms shipments that Trump had put into effect, you know, without conditions. And, you know, this is a government that the Biden administration has been speaking out, as they should, about human rights abuses in Iran, in Syria, and Belarus, in Venezuela, and Nicaragua, and Cuba, and elsewhere. And yet, when it comes to US allies, it's a very different story. The United States is the world's #1 supporter of dictatorial regimes around the world. And polls show that the vast majority of Americans, we're talking over 80%, believe that US arms transfers should be conditional on human rights. There's probably no single issue where the policies of the US government and the views of the American people are so at odds. And but because most of the criticisms of Biden's policies are from the right, many advocates of human rights have said, "Oh, well, let's defend Biden. Let's not criticize him too much. He's on the defensive. We need, you know, we need to be concerned about COVID, about the infrastructure, about racism, you know, about the climate change. I mean, all these important issues. And so let's not be critical of Biden." Well, I'm sorry, we need to be critical of Biden. I mean, I certainly support him against these attacks from the right, but we really need to make human rights more of an issue, because and I think we have more chance now under Biden, because again, Trump didn't even pretend to support human rights. The Biden administration does. So I really think we can apply the pressure. Now, much of the issues, much of what debate there has been about the arms transfers have been largely about their use in war crimes in Yemen and to a lesser extent Libya by Emirati forces. And, you know, these and that is certainly very, very important. But I think it's also important to point out that by making these arms transfers, which the UAE really wants, unconditional, they have no incentive to end persecution of people like Mansoor. And that and though these jet fighters are not used directly in the repression of Emiratis and foreigners living in the Emirates, that they are essentially a sign of approval. They are essentially an endorsement. And so it's critically important that that we challenge these arms transfers and their trade agreements and anything else in which the U.S. government, which claims to be the world's greatest democracy, which claims to be a supporter of human rights, you know, that these kinds of it's critically important that in addition to the solidarity work and advocacy in this particular case, that we also look at the broader structural international environment that makes this kind of repression possible.
If I could just add a couple of observations. I agree with everything that's been said. But
I will bring you in. I will bring you
Okay.
in. Sorry, I will bring you in. I just want to. I forgot to mention that Stephen, Zooms. He's a politics professor at University of San Francisco and a human rights activist. So, with that said, I wanted to bring in our guests. If any of the members who have joined us, if they have a question, please raise your hand, and our host will, ask you to ask your question. But in the meantime, I already have a couple of hands raised as Castro wants to come back in. But if you want to go ahead, by all means do. I mean, do you want to make your point, and then we can continue our discussion with the further questions?
Well, 3 points. One, the United States has never cared about democracy in the Middle East. Indeed, we overthrew the only democracy really that was indigenous with Mossadegh in 1953. Secondly, we don't even defend human rights when our own citizens or residents are involved. After Jamal Khashoggi was assassinated at the instructions of MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, no sanctions followed.
Bruce, do you want to push the camera back, your phone forward so we can see you? That's it. That's better. Yeah.
Let's see.
Okay.
That's
better. We can see you. That's better now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And lastly, the fact is that unfortunately, it's not just the United States that I think sabotages democracy among Arab countries. There really has never been the strength, despite the heroism of a handful, to carry the day and insist on democratic rule that follows the rule of law. After Arab Spring, for instance, we did oust dictators, but we ended up with just new dictatorial faces. And that's a problem that the United States can't cure. I think the people on this webinar can help. It takes bravery and courage to stand up to these authoritarians, but it's got to come ultimately from the people themselves to prevail. No external force can force a democracy on a culture that's inhospitable.
Thank you, Bruce. Castro, you raised your hand. Did you want to add anything?
Yes. After rehearing what Stephen and Bruce again just now, yeah, I don't think they care about the democracy in the Middle East, right? Because they have money, because they have some kind of control the terrorism. And something that I really want to raise here is that the United Arab Emirates, let's go back to 2010 or 2011, I cannot remember sharply. There was a Norwegian woman, she was raped. And she went to the police station and she said, listen, I was raped by one of my colleagues. And this lady, she was taken into jail because she was guilty because of being raped. This is how things works in the Middle East. So Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, Prime Minister and Vice President of UAE, he came on TV and he said, listen, we are a brand new country. We are learning with the foreigners. We have foreigners in our country because we are learning with them. And this is something very special that I take now, that I mention now. If it's a brand new country and they are learning, they have Indians, Pakistanis, they have people working all the shelves of the society, sorry for that, of the society. They have foreigners, CEO of malls, airports, oil companies. How dare the United Arab Emirates think they are able to take care of public persecution? They cannot. They can absolutely not. And when we come back to Ahmed Mansoor case, that he told me, I knew my sentence on BBC because they didn't mention to me. In my case, for example, it's clear, the law in UAE, if you are taken with drugs, you have 10 years of possession. You are sentenced for 10 years. If you are using drugs, you have 2 years, so it makes 12 years. The situation happened in my house. I'm going to do it very fast. I will resume it. Someone took the drug in my house and said, listen, policeman, this is my drug. I use it. So he should be sentenced for 12 years. he was sentenced for 2 years and he's back home. So this kind of mistake, even when the CID, Criminal Investigation Department, they need to go there and they need to give their statement, the guy didn't know who he was talking about. So for my friend, it was a benefit. Instead of 12, he took 2 years, he got the pardon, and he went home. But many others, and it depends on your nationality, it depends on your passport. If you are European, this kind of mistake are not going to happen. If you are African, they will. If you are Asian, South Asian, they will happen. All right. And this is again what we said. The US, they don't care about the democracy in this kind of countries. And the reason they put these people like Ahmed Mansoor behind bars. Some he mentioned his friends. I cannot recall the name now, but Jamal, that happened in Turkey, in the Saudi embassy. Mansoor told me about him. He said, listen, these people, they are so crazy about the power that they think we want to take the power, but we don't. We just want to have a better country. That's why they put us behind bars and they will never release us. They will never release us. I know that I will never see my family again. I'll never be with them. That's it. Thanks, Nassim, for the word.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Does anyone else want to come in? If not, I mean, I've got a few more. I need to leave for an appointment. Okay, Stephen had to leave for an appointment. That's fine. I have a question for a couple of you guys. I mean, Bruce, I mean, you've been heavily involved with the case with the Princess Latifa and getting her attention, attention across the world. I'm wondering, is there something that could be done to replicate this kind of success? And what was unique about the case of Princess Latifa, which it probably doesn't exist with Ahmed Mansoor's case? Because I mean, really, I mean, it's only people like us who are observing human rights situation in the UAE and the Arab world in general, keen observers like us, know about him. But how do you raise his profile to a level where it's like the Princess, where the BBC, the FT, and all the other mainstream media are interested in his case? So how would we do that?
Well, I think the difference is that the Princess was a celebrity.
Oh no, sorry. So that was a question. Sorry, Bruce. That was a question to David. You can come in afterwards if you want. You can come in afterwards if you want. Go for it, David.
I'll come in at the end. No,
you go for it, Bruce. You go first, and then David can speak afterwards.
So who do you want to go first?
Oh, David. I was asking David. Sorry, David first.
I think you might be seeing the news going out at the moment that Latifa met with her cousin Marcus from our campaign. So that is currently breaking news at the moment. So it's perhaps a little bit too early to say it's been a success, but I think at the time when this happened in 2018, we were, yes, obviously having the word princess and the drama that unfolded in 2018 with boats and kidnaps and guns and international citizens made it newsworthy. But that news that we managed to break was in the UK. And ultimately, what has the UK got to do with an Arabian princess? Very little. But we managed to get people's hearts and minds attached to the case and the story. And because of that, we managed to get increasing media attention, starting in the UK, but then moving around the world. And it took 3 years, but we got there in the end. And I think with Ahmed, he's obviously not a member of the royal family. And the capturing of him, the arresting and keeping him in jail and the conditions he's in is not as newsworthy as it is when you can put the word princess or prince before that. But it is newsworthy. We need to make sure the news around the world and people keep on following up. And I think that's one of the things that enabled us to move forward with the Latifa campaign in 2018. Even the press didn't want to run the videos, because the UAE was pushing out stories. This isn't the princess. This is a Moroccan actress. That was their first response. But we kept on going. And it was because of individual supporters on social media that wouldn't stop talking about the case that it gradually got momentum. And then obviously in our case, as people know, in February this year, we released footage that we smuggled out of Latifa's jail. Now that's probably not going to happen in the case of Ahmed Mansoor, but it's, I'm not suggesting that it's something that could happen, but it's things like that that enabled us to keep the media attention. And ultimately, we saw this year Boris Johnson, Secretary Blinken, even former Irish President Mary Robinson, all raising concerns, and it worked. So I think the key to that is start at the ground, don't stop, keep going, and try and highlight the story. At the end of the day, you've got an eminent international human rights defender, a family man who has done nothing wrong, who has been abused in a country where not just the West and so many people go on holiday, there's so many commercial interests. And so we've got a good opportunity now. We've got Dubai Expo 2020, 2021, whatever it is called now, coming up. We've got a lot of international attention coming to the UAE. In a little bit over a year, we've got their periodic review at the UN. Sadly, probably next year, we're going to see them take a seat on the Human Rights Council. I understand there's six places, there's 6 nominees. There's a lot of attention that's going to be directed to them. And I think with that, we need to capture it, focus, and I think we can raise Ahmed's case more and more than we are at the moment.
Thank you very much. Bruce, did you want to come in?
Well, I think we confront an issue that Stalin exploited when he said, 1 million deaths is a statistic. 1 death is a tragedy. And so the violations are so widespread in the Emirates, people could say, well, this is just another one, they're kind of numb to the human rights violation. But you're always looking for some kind of new initiative that could be taken. And at least there are 3, I think, that come to mind. One, there could be a request to the Working Group on Arbitrary Detentions, that's an arm of the Human Rights Council in Geneva, to list him as a victim. Among others, Julian Assange has been listed as a victim of illegal arbitrary detention. It's a conclusion that's valid under international law, and it might cause some kind of sanction to be triggered under a human rights violation. Secondly, in the United States anyway, under the Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act, there can be a push to have the administration list the UAE officials who are complicit in the detention and torture, barred from traveling to the US with visa freezes and from having their assets frozen, and always stigmatizing their names as being listed as complicit in violations of internationally recognized human rights. And then there's a third possibility. The United States has a unique statute called the Torture Victim Protections Act, and it enables foreigners who are tortured under color of foreign law to sue in the United States if there's jurisdiction here for damages. Now, there is a problem that's arisen in its enforcement because it's oftentimes said there's no personal jurisdiction over the perpetrators of the torture as long as all of the violations occurred in a foreign state. But if we can get an amendment to the statute to make clear that there is jurisdiction, or even have a case like happened after 9/11 with Saudi Arabia, a special statute was created that enabled the victims of 9/11 to sue Saudi Arabia. It's ongoing right now. That's another way to try to highlight the importance of focusing on persons like Mansoor who are subject to torture, which is, after all, a universal crime, a crime against all mankind under international jurisprudence.
Thank you, Bruce, for that. I have a question for Ahmed. If you can comment on really some of the comments that's been appearing following, I would say, coup in Tunisia at the moment, where many Gulf residents have gone on Twitter to say that, look, we don't need democracy in the Middle East, as long as we have economic prosperity and jobs, as long as we have, amazing economy, why do we need democracy? And democracy has been a failure, and Tunisia is highlighted as an example. So at MBS, for example, Mohammed bin Salman seems to be very popular amongst the youth in his country. So how do Arab people on the street feel about these ideals which we take for granted here in the West? I mean, is it the case that majority of Arabs don't really want the kind of democracy we are speaking about here, as is presented on Twitter and elsewhere. What do you think about that? I mean, do Arab people generally in the Gulf, do they want freedoms and democracies which we in the West take for granted?
Yeah, actually, the answer of this question is if it's really as they show the people they don't want democracy, why the jail is full of people and full of people who call for democracy? Why they actually attack the people in this way that we see, and they actually use the media, use everything to attack the people who call for democracy? Why they are scared of them? The people of Gulf and the people of all Arab people, I think they are wise enough and they have knowledge, and there is open world today to know it's better for them to have the democracy. And the other thing that we have to understand, there are people who actually they get great benefits and many things from the government. They have power from the government, so they stand with the government. And we know that some of people, they are against the democracy, and they get benefit from the dictatorial system, and we know they gain a lot of money of that, and they don't think about the values that we think about. We have good money, we have good life in general, when we say general, but the severity with that is very obvious, that you can talk, you don't have a freedom. They treat you as, sorry to say it, but as a slave. You are things that they use you. We can see that when they use media, and they have their people to talk, and there is their people voice talking about that. We don't need this democracy. And all the people, and how they attack the people who call them for democracy, they call them terrorists. They call them that they want they attack the security of the country. They want to come over the government. Even it was very peaceful call. So if that's my answer, if it's right what they say, people don't want that, you will not see this reaction against the people who call for democracy.
Thank you, Ahmed, for that response. Kaleo, you've raised your hand. Did you want to add anything? Turn your microphone on, please. Sorry, turn your microphone on, Kaleo.
My microphone is on.
Yeah, it's on now. Carry on. So you want to say something?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now. We can hear you.
Okay. About slavery, what Ahmed was saying, I just remember one situation that shocked me as soon as I arrived in Al Sadr jail in Abu Dhabi. One of the jailers, at this point, I was understanding a little bit of Arabic, right? And one of the jailers asked me if I could work in construction, plumbery, or whatsoever. And before I even think on answering, another officer said, "Listen, he's not Nigerian, he's Brazilian." I didn't know why was this this kind of discrimination, or why they said about my nationality. And later on, a few days back, when our AC had a problem, I asked Mansoor, listen, do these people, they get any money for this? Because I see these Nigerian people, they work from morning to evening, and on summer, they start working at 6 o'clock in the evening in the jail. The Filipinos, they clean the jail. Said, Ahmed, do they get any money for that? Do they have their sentence reduced because they work for the jail? No, they do not. At that point, I didn't know Mansoor very well, right? So what did I do? I went and I started asking to the prisoners themselves. And I said, listen, do you guys receive anything? Just a bottle of water. But they say they will put our name on the next AFU, on the next pardon. and then we can go home. But we know we won't. But we live here on hope. If we lose hope here in the jail, we lose everything. But they lie to us, they make us work because they say we are going home on the next paddle. That's it.
Thank you, Khalil, for this hopeful message. I'm wondering if anyone else wants to jump in, if anyone wants to add anything. If not, I think we can end the conversation. I think it's been a very, very enlightening and interesting conversation. Some very, very emotional from Khalil, and really appreciate you coming on and telling us about your experience, and also to all my other guests who have shared their expertise and knowledge on how to highlight the issue of Ahmed Mansoor and also raise awareness of the broader situation in the UAE, which I described as an effort to really make the world safe for autocracy, so the UAE and the countries like the Saudis can survive and continue as authoritarian regimes. I want to thank our organizers, Arab Organization for Human Rights, and all other guests that have joined us. So hopefully I'll see you again soon. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye. Have a good, safe evening.